Well, welcome to the new Fireside chat series that we're starting with the Band of Flight. And
Right.
so for those that are listening, this is Mr. Scott Belk, and do we go by Professor, Doctor, the Czar?
The czar. I
King
can
of
go
the lip
by.
slurs?
Yeah. Well, for the sake of today, I'll be Scott. How about that?
Sounds perfect.
Yeah.
So Scott Belk is currently is a chair of the Jazz Studies now, right? At
Yes.
Cincinnati Conservatory of Music, which is right up the road from us here in Dayton.
Right.
He spent some time in the Band of Flight here at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So maybe we'll start there, kind of maybe where you're from, your roots, and then what kind of brought you to the Air Force back in the day.
Sure. Well, I'm originally from Morgantown, West Virginia. Grew up there, and then moved around quite a bit over after college. I went to University of Tennessee and graduated University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Went out on the road and did the Glenn Miller Orchestra for about a year, and worked on cruise ships. Did a lot of freelance work with circuses and theme parks and the types of things that you would expect a young professional to do. And was at the University of North Texas doing my master's degree. And there was a bit of a pipeline in those days from Denton to the Band of Flight. So one of my friends that I had played with in a group called the 1 O'Clock Lab Band had come up, and he had auditioned and was doing a position on bass trombone.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe he might even still be in the career field, or he's coming up on. He might be retired at this point, but he said that they had an opening for a trumpet player and wanted to know if I was interested in doing it. I said, well, there's no way I'm going to make it all the way up to Dayton to do an audition. I was in my last semester as a master's student at North Texas. And he said, well, we're going to be at Tinker Air Force Base, and you can just come up and do the audition up there. So I ended up doing my audition in base billeting in a hotel room with about 10 guys sitting around in BDUs, and the captain and the associate conductor who were just sitting in an armchair, and I played my audition up there. So that was back in 1995. Okay. So I did 4 years at Wright-Pat, exclusively at Wright-Pat. And while I was I started my doctorate down at CCM, where I'm teaching now. So that was, I went on terminal leave and did a short tour with the Airmen and Note. And on the way out, about 3 weeks, out from Missoula, Montana, on all the way across the Northwest over to, towards the Midwest to Chicago. That was the last thing I did. And then I started full time as a doctoral student at the conservatory. While I was still at Wright-Pat on summer leave, I started taking classes for my doctorate. So I would kind of drive down from Dayton to Cincinnati early in the morning and take morning classes as part of you could take a short window back in those days. You could take like 3 weeks. Yeah. And so that's what I did.
And yeah, for those who aren't familiar, that they still have things like that where you can finish your degrees while you're in, and oftentimes don't have to dip into your GI, which is really nice. We have our trombone player right now. He's currently finishing his master's at Wright State, and he's utilizing the tuition assistance programs, which is pretty cool. I have my doctorate, so I might be out of luck there, but for those.
Well, doesn't some of it, is it good for spouses or dependents or?
It might be that I don't know. That might get into the kind of GI stuff. But
you're post 9/11, and it's a different thing. I used tuition assistance, and then when I got out of the band, I went full time and was doing GI Bill. And now I tell people that was the richest I've ever been, because I was single, I was on an assistantship, and I was on GI Bill, and I was gigging a lot. So that was a good time.
Now, so when you were in, what were the ensembles typically for Wright-Pat at the time?
I did only two: the concert band and the Night Flight Jazz Ensemble, which we did. So we would do a tour every couple of months, I think, with that group. And in those days, I think the the band of flight was maybe 55 people. Does that sound right? Something like
Yeah,
that.
that's all right.
50, 55, at least in the concert band. So it was a pretty substantial organization. We did a few parades. We would always do that Hall of Fame. You guys don't still do that, do you?
I
The
don't
Hall
think
of Fame
so.
parade. Okay. All right. That was up in Canton for the Football Hall of Fame. It was like a
Oh, okay, cool.
5 mile end of July parade. It was brutal.
Yeah. Now,
So
for that, during the Hall of Fame parade, did you get a chance to meet some who's of the NFL world, or?
no, we didn't have a whole lot of crossover because we would do the parade and then we would play we played a concert every year too. So we would set up downtown. I think they closed off the streets and we would do a pretty a full program of patriotic stuff for the Hall of Fame program. Then we would pack up during the fireworks and get head back.
Now,
So,
you mentioned Glenn Miller Orchestra. I
mhm.
find that interesting because I think there's still a few people in the career field now that did time with the Glenn Miller Orchestra. So it seems
Yep.
like there's a connection there.
Well, I mean, it was the Army Air Force,
Yeah.
the Army Air Corps, actually, when the band enlisted with Glenn Miller during the war, and so there's the obvious, connection with the ensemble, and that band still tours. But when I was out, we were doing like 50 weeks a year, and I think they're still doing a substantial amount of time on the road. So
Wow.
it's kind of a natural. Yeah.
Did you ever run into a Steve Heflin?
I don't believe so. I don't.
He did some time as a drummer for the Glenn Miller Orchestra, and he's currently superintendent out at Travis. But
Okay. All
I'll
right.
give him a quick shout out, that fellow Glenn Miller.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, there's some other friends of mine, Chris Hamill's out at,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
yeah, we weren't out together on I'm almost positive that he did the Miller band at some point. So, there's a good connection.
He's what they call the first sergeant, but I'm sure they had first sergeants when you were in. He's the first
Yeah.
sergeant at the Academy Band currently in Colorado.
Right. Okay,
So
yeah.
for those that don't know, the first sergeant role in the Air Force is more or less kind of an HR almost representative. They
Yeah.
serve as an intermediary between a lot of the airman tier and the NCO tier, and problem solvers of all sorts of things that you would expect maybe an HR person to deal with. So he's wearing a couple hats right now in addition to playing trumpet.
Yeah. Usually when the first sergeant was talking to me, it was I was in trouble, but that was another thing altogether.
That can happen.
So I didn't hang out with the first shirt very often. Not when I was a senior airman anyway. So
now I'm sure you had a plethora of performance experiences, and it might be hard to narrow down to one distinct one, but if you dig back, maybe there's one of those that you found uniquely impressionable, or
you remember them for not always for the right reason. It's not because it was specifically inspirational, but usually because you do so many of them, you remember quirky things about the gigs or things that are that just stand out in your mind. They may or may not make sense. We did the Dayton Air Show one time and we did the national anthem with the current Miss America, which was very interesting. And at the same time, we were in formation, and that was the first time they had a B2. Any of us had seen one. We didn't know there was going to be one, and so we were supposed to be in formation at attention. And everyone's like looking up like that, I lost my headphones, and because it was the first time. I mean, we saw the fighters, the stealth fighters around, because they would be doing their maneuvers around Dayton. I'm sure you see it. You see that all the time, but we never saw the bombers, and no one had seen one at all in the air. And this is the first time any of us had. Wow. And we got and we're going. We're supposed to be basically either at parade rest or at attention, and we're all going, look up there. Yes. So we kind of got yelled at on the bus after that by our first sergeant, actually. So that was a pretty memorable one, and we did play for some of the Bosnian peace accords, some functions for that. One of the ones that I did, I actually was quite memorable. It was unique for me. There was a member of the engineering corps that had been passed away, and the group from Wright Pat took a bus back to his hometown, actually in West Virginia. So I traveled with a group of engineers, which was the first time and the only time I traveled with, by myself, when I wasn't a member of the group and a member of the ensemble. We always toured with at least a quintet.
Yeah.
So that I went back to his hometown with all of the engineers, and I played taps for that ceremony. That was a very it stood out of my mind for a number of reasons, as that solemn occasion would. So there were some funny ones, of course,
Yeah.
but there was one in I believe it was in Akron that we had to stop. We were in the middle of a football stadium, playing on the middle of the field, and a really, really big storm came through, and it came through behind the conductor. So he was conducting, didn't see any of it. And we saw this giant storm coming in over and we ended up having to scramble to tear everything down and get to shelter. It was actually kind of a beneficial thing for me, because that particular gig or concert, I had forgotten my uniform.
Oh.
So
Yeah.
I was on loading crew, and the second bus pulled up too late, and we were about an hour from the hotel on this particular one.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no hope for me. For one gig, I got to be a senior master sergeant, and that was the height of my Air Force career as far as the rank was concerned.
Yeah, we've had a few impromptu, costume changes when you
yeah
one piece of the 20, and you gotta makeshift something on the fly. So that's,
right, and this
where
was
the Air Force continuity comes in.
Yeah, this was nothing. I had zero, so I had to buy a pair of shoes at the shopping mall across the street. So those type of things are they always stand out, as terror in the moment, but it was looking back at it pretty fondly,
So you've touched upon a little bit already your transition to civilian life. So while you were in, you pursued the doctorate, and
right.
You were gigging around town. So were there some ensembles like, I don't know, the Dayton Philharmonic, I'm sure was still around, of course, Cincinnati Symphony, all that.
Sure, yeah.
Probably some jazz, jazz stuff going on.
Right, yeah, and I played pretty regularly, not regularly, but I played a lot of lead trumpet with the Dayton Philharmonic. My wife, who I met at CCM, that actually, while I was still stationed at Wright Pat, played second horn in that ensemble in DPO for about 18 years. Yeah. So you played with Cincinnati, played and recorded with the Cincinnati Symphony with their pops, and just was working like crazy. One of the reasons I transitioned from the service is that I was working a lot on the outside, and I had a lot of freelance opportunities for me. And I came home one day, and I had, I think that's back when we still had answering machines.
Right.
And I had calls for about 21 different services worth of work. And I thought, okay, well, I think it's probably safe to look at a career on the outside. But there were many times I considered what it would be, the possibility of staying in for a career. It was definitely something I considered seriously many times.
Yeah. Now, as far as reflecting back with your career, what would you say from your personal experience is the real value of the Air Force bands? Their mission, why do we exist, and why should we continue to exist? In reflective of being an alumni from that, especially kind of having both aspects as both a freelance musician in the civilian world and being enlisted as well. What did you see as far as impact on when you're playing for veterans and whatnot and all that. I'm sure you kind of alluded to earlier, as simple as it is playing the taps. I mean, the musically simple, but profound effects on those in mourning.
Yeah. Well, when you mentioned you might ask me a question like that, I kind of struggled at first because I was thinking, well, it's hard for me to think of it from that standpoint.
Yeah.
When I was a member of the ensemble, and I didn't really tend to think of things from the standpoint of the community or from the folks on the outside. So I started to think about it, and I can only say, now that I've been out for 20 years, so 21 years, is that one of my favorite things to do, or not favorite things to do, but something that's meaningful to me as a member of that community now, somebody who is a veteran, is somebody that has served, is I have two sons. Now they're teenagers, but one of my something that has been a very proud moment for me is any time I've been someplace, and there have been many times where we've been celebrating a holiday of some sort in the community, and there's been a chance to hear the Air Force song.
Yeah.
And they get to see their father stand up, and when the Air Force song comes on, and when it's played, and that's something that's one of my proudest things and moments in my adult life as a father and as a community member. So I can only guess that when another veteran such as I gets a chance to stand up with their family there and with the members of their community, that they can feel the kind of pride that I feel now as a father and as someone, as a family, head of my family. And I hope that that's what I was able to hopefully inspire a little bit when I was in. But it can be quite a deep connection have to be a veteran and to hear you don't think anything about it when you're playing the song for the 11,000th time on tour, and you're thinking, oh well, as soon as this song is over, it's a little less. You don't have the impact as the performer that you do when you're waiting. It's coming up, and your kids are there, and so I think that would be my answer to that one.
Yeah, and kind of to piggyback, since we're probably going to be hopefully reaching a lot of trumpet players with this video, Doc Severinsen came a couple years ago to play with the Dayton Philharmonic, and I guess it was his 90th birthday, I believe, and he's still honking away. And I was going to play with him. We had an Air Force conflict, but I was still able to make the concert.
Sure. And
so we were chit-chatting with him a little bit after the concert. And number one, he's just a very humble guy for who he is. I'd be remiss to find anybody without recognizing the name Doc Severinsen.
Sure,
But he's a huge fan of the military bands, and he was telling us a story that I think one time they were, looking at budget cuts, which is often the case, and they were talking about, hitting the airman a note. He said he called up a few key senators, and may have had some expletives in his delivery, but after that call, they didn't touch the airman a note. But it's just the reach can be, not just through the community, but all the way up to people like Doc Severinsen. So I found that pretty cool. I didn't know that before.
I want to say he might have even written a letter that's in circulate. Yeah, I've seen it, or a copy of it. Yeah, so it's a big deal. It's a big part of our culture. It's a big part of our heritage, and it's a proud part of our heritage. I'm glad it's continuing. I'm glad to see you guys are keeping on the, no pun intended, keeping the flame,
Right. Nice. I see what you did there.
Yeah, you see what I did there? Yeah.
Well, so as far as, maybe new trumpet players that are coming in for their first round of the Air Force, what advice would you have for them, not only from starting their Air Force career, but maybe starting their career in general, as far as, longevity of their career and things to keep in mind, things to consider? There may be some ups and downs with you're still in the military, for example, with the Air Force, and so keeping your eyes on the prize, and maybe some things that you dealt with when you were new to the Air Force.
I could give some very specific advice.
Sure.
The first is at basic training, don't lose the bugle.
Yeah.
That's not a good thing to do. All
I
right.
have a feeling there might be
Yeah.
a story behind this.
Yeah. So don't do that. Don't leave it in in a chow hall
Yeah.
when you come back from playing, when you play retreat. So
Yeah.
keep that with you. Don't do, yeah, that doesn't go well. Um, the thing that I think is important to keep in mind if you're coming into the service as a creative, someone who's coming in a creative field like music, and one of the reasons why I found I actually got some great advice from of all people, my drill sergeant, who as I was getting ready to ship out, I was the only one in the barracks, and I was older than he was actually. And he just kind of said, we were just there, and he was actually a fan of like a big drum corps fan. I found this out right at the very end. Right. And I was coming out of North Texas, and he knew a little bit about, about what I had done.
Yeah.
And he said to me, the Air Force, and this was great advice. You don't expect to get this kind of advice, on the last day of basic training. He said, the Air Force is going to be what you make of it. And I found that to be the case. And when, in any job, you're going to find people in situations that are not, as you might like them to be. And that's just the nature of life. And so from a creative standpoint, I found what was really helpful to me is to understand the nature of the job itself. So why are you there? And then to understand that it's because you're not choosing your repertoire, because you don't pick who does what solos, or you don't, or the schedule. I think for a creative mind, it's important to be active on the outside creatively. I said, if you expect to get your artistic jollies from a service band, you may be disappointed from that on a regular basis, simply because that's not the job. The job is very specific, and you don't have a lot of artistic license, and that's not a bad thing. That's just how it is. So if you don't have a creative outlet on the outside in some respect, I think it's difficult to not let smaller things get to you. So I think that from a that standpoint, that was crucial for my sanity. And we started a bunch of band of flight players. We started a Thursday night reading band at a club called Jazz Central. We played every Thursday for about 2.5, 3 years till I got out.
They still got it. I understand they still have Jazz Central going.
Yeah, yeah, and I started that band in 1997. There wasn't a band. I mean, the band didn't exist that I wanted to play in, and I realized, well, I guess I'm going to have to start it.
Yeah.
So that was something that was important, and it helped me maintain my creative, the creative side of my career, and also helped me connect in my community in a different way that helped me make a lot of connections from that. So I would say definitely, for someone coming in, to look at it as, don't just expect any job to be fulfilling. If there's some aspect of the job that's not fulfilling, then you're responsible for that on your own, and that's to go seek that, on the outside, create it.
Absolutely.
The other thing is if your supervisor says go get your flu shot, get your flu shot. That was the last thing I got written up for. That was back when they didn't have it all on computer.
Yeah.
So particularly now, now it's a much different different time.
Yeah.
So, but that would be some of the career advice that I would give.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I've always heard stories where even within the bands, you can be creative, and sometimes it fits, sometimes it doesn't. Mm-hmm. So I think they've had like Celtic bands at some places.
Sure.
Bagpiper is permanently signed still as a DC band that kind of came out of somewhere. And so I think if it's a service band, there's still malleability, but right. Absolutely sound advice that if it's not within, what the current goals are or whatever, don't be dismayed. You, like you said, might want to get with a group of friends on the outside, or I've been fortunate to play with a number of groups. This is a great area for that.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, and that's definitely helped. If I'm like, ah, oh, can't play the Air Force song for the 50 millionth time, well, that's the job. And then I
Yeah.
hopefully go get to play some symphony music or whatever to fulfill
Yeah.
that you know, that musical appetite. So
Well, and one of the things that goes along with the idea of the job is what you make of it is there are many resources that are available for service people, that including education and a chance to take lessons and study on the outside. I started studying with one of my main teachers, a guy named Vince DiMartino, and
yep.
that was I had met him before, but I didn't go to school to study with him.
Yeah.
And he's down in Kentucky, and in the days that I was in, there were resources, and I know they still exist to further your study. And so I would take a van down to Danville, Kentucky, and I would meet with him once a month for a couple of years, and that had a profound impact on my career in many ways. And it was not an easy thing to do. It was 200 miles each way, and it took me all day, and I'd get home late at night, and I had to be on a day off.
Yeah.
So a lot of people want to take a day off, and they're going to take a day off. I tried to use the resources that were available to me to just become a better player and a better musician.
Yeah.
So that's something that's different. You have that kind of extra training that you can do. A lot of people don't get around to doing it, and do it.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, I'd love to talk for hours, but it creates a time crunch for us unless you, I don't know, pay the bucks, I suppose.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it. I think this is going to be of immense value for everybody, really, but, kind of trying to bridge that gap between alumni and current service members. And really, we're getting an effort, a social media push effort to get out, get the reach out into the community and kind of alert them that the band's around, and we want to, get involved with the community and all that. So I really appreciate your time, and hope you're staying well and sane with all the current craziness of the COVID-19.
Yeah, so, we're keeping safe. We're trying to keep safe and healthy. So.
Yep. So we're all quarantined. Is a great time to practice some of Scott Belk's lip flexibility.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
You gotta get the plug in there somewhere. So if you don't know,
make sure you're healthy before you start doing that, because you don't want those to take you out. So but enjoy and absolutely. Well, so are you going to get a chance to talk to my bandmate Sammy Kestenholtz?
No,
Sammy K.
Put him on the list. I haven't heard that name. So
yeah, he was a drummer that was. Yep, he's out in LA. Has been since '99.
Oh, perfect.
And working, he'd be a perfect person for this.
Absolutely.
You got to get him, Sammy K.
All right, shout out.
All right, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, hey, I appreciate it again, and take care.
Absolutely, nice talking to you.
Thanks.